one of the things that I kind of struggled with when I got back from my service was like a ever-growing sense of purposelessness. You go from this place where your day is defined by like a series of objectives that you do consistently in a large group of people, and then all of a sudden you're like out into the real world where you're isolated, you don't have the directives, you don't have the objectives that you had, and you're just trying to like figure out how to create a life for yourself and find some direction. And a lot of times, like for myself, I struggle with that. I failed miserably at finding some direction for my life, and the compounding nature of the issues just kind of led me to go from a state of purposelessness then into hopelessness, and then you're just kind of like I had no direction. I had no real no optimism about my life, no hope in anything other than external factors, hoping that something would work out for me. And so we wanted to kind of talk about the idea of fostering optimism, you know, what it looks like to kind of build some hope in yourself rather than just externalizing all that hope. And, you know, that was kind of the main objective with this topic. So you want to take it from there?
Yeah, so let's see. So perceptions and tendencies may lead us to inaccurate attributions, meaning we attach to behavior. We make snap judgments, which can become especially problematic when based in stereotypes, exaggerated beliefs associated with categorizing system. We cling to first impressions, a tendency influenced by the primacy effect, halo effect, horns effect, and confirmation bias. We judge ourselves more charitably than others, a tendency influenced by fundamental attribution error and self-serving bias. We are afflicted by our expectations, or we're influenced by our expectation. We're influenced by what is most obvious. We assume others are like us. Mismatched perceptions can interfere with communication, but there are tools to help us better understand our and other perceptions. Perception checking provides a good way to review assumptions and share interpretations. To understand others more completely, we also need empathy. There's kind of a bit to unpack in there. Where did I see it? Fundamental attribution error. So that's just like if someone's acting a certain way, something unpleasant, you might just say, well, that's because that person is a bad person. That's why they act this way, instead of saying like, oh, that's probably a situation that they're dealing with. So it's like we have these assumptions about the world around us. They're not always accurate.
Yeah, the inherent nature of people, not just what they're experiencing at the moment. Yeah, I like, we've got a note here about the empathy, but essentially it's the ability to recreate another person's perspective and experience the world from their point of view. I know that for myself, that empathy was key in me developing optimism in my own life. I had to have the ability to look at other people and understand where they were coming from. And when I would do that, I would begin to see reflections of myself in them. And that in and of itself gave me a much more optimistic view of the world. Instead of seeing the differences in everyone, I began to see the similarities between all of us. I can't emphasize enough how important empathy is to optimism. They're just like from my perspective, at least, kind of hand-in-hand correlation between the two. So definitely want to encourage you as far as that goes, that if you're looking for like kind of one of those like, so what's the key? Empathy is a huge part of it. If you can find ways to foster and develop empathy, that'll definitely have a positive influence on your optimism. I wanted to take a moment and just kind of define what optimism is. I mean, we use these words, but we can be very imprecise sometimes. When I went and looked this up, I actually found two definitions for optimism, and I really like both of them. The first one is your traditional characteristic definition of optimism, defined as hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something. That's kind of the optimism that we're all used to. I was unaware of this, but I learned it after finding this definition. There's another concept of optimism. It's actually a doctrine or a theory that's set forth by the German mathematician Leibniz. And what this says is that optimism is the belief that this world is the best of all possible worlds. And I really like that, because in that you see a lot of opportunity for empathy, you see a lot of opportunity for hope, you see a lot of opportunity for just viewing this world through a lens that allows you to like share love with it, to give love and to receive love from it. So just to have taken a moment to define those two things, my take on optimism is that it's probably best defined as a symptom of your relationship with the world. If you have a poor relationship with the world, you're probably not going to be very optimistic about this world that you live in. If you have a positive relationship with this world, you're probably going to be quite a bit more optimistic. From my perspective, and just being self-critical of how I was when I first got out, I didn't have a positive relationship with the world. I had a very bellicose mentality. I looked at people as obstacles. I looked at everybody as a potential enemy. And I reflected that in my life. I was miserable. I lacked hope. I lacked direction. I lacked optimism because I was in a world I didn't trust. And I reflected that in my own life by a lack of trust in myself. And it just kind of left me isolated, cold, and alone. I think when I think about the things that were bringing me down, I wonder if perhaps I wasn't resisting what was really going on in the world. Because today I can look around and I see a world that's full of love and opportunity and hope, and I can be optimistic about it. And the world hasn't really changed much. It's just me that's changed. I've changed my relationship with it. So that's just kind of my personal take with, you know, what I think is kind of a fundamental characteristic of optimism is that your level of optimism is probably going to be matched by your view of the world or your relationship with the world. So
yeah, optimism is a symptom of your relationship with the world. Are you fighting against the current? Do you know where you are on your path, or are you lost? So like for myself, it took me like the longest time to kind of I knew I was in a state of suffering, and that I knew that what I was doing, what my life was about, where I was going to work and what I was spending my time doing wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't serving me. It wasn't anything part of the future that I had hope for myself. And it's an interesting state of mind to be in, because it's not a proactive one. I would just be, it's where a lot of drinking came in. It's especially, I know that's common for a lot of veterans, but it's just not serving. It's not serving. And to get an optimistic view, you need to kind of have an understanding of who you are. And when you do so, you have an understanding of what you want. You can be able to see what things in your life aren't serving you. And then that's when you start building a plan of direction, what you want for yourself, and start working towards it. And then when you start having those things start to be implemented or start to become part of your life, is when you start getting this sense of satisfaction. And it's these happenings, having satisfaction in what you're doing and what you're pursuing and having them come true, that's when you're starting to live a full life, instead of just having a hope that things will get better.
Yeah, I liked what you said there about hoping that you would have this future. And I think that's a problem for a lot of guys. They hope that they have this future, but the future is very ill-defined. What does that look like? Well, I don't know. I hope I'm happy though. I think there's a lesson there, and there's a danger in confusing hope and optimism. Hope can crush you when it doesn't have a foundation. Hope can be a burden that you can't get out from underneath, especially when you don't have any real direction. It's just like a longing desire. Hoping that things will change does not create change. Change doesn't come from continuing patterns that brought on the need for change. I think for me, I look at hope, and hope in yourself is incredible. It's awesome. But when you put hope in external factors, I hope it's going to be better. I hope she'll come back. I hope they'll like me. Man, you're setting yourself up for a world of pain there, you know, because that kind of hope, that's not going to elicit any real response. It's just going to leave you longing and feeling unfulfilled. So just my cautionary take on the dangers of confusing optimism with hope.
Right. Hope doesn't make change, just creates hopelessness. Hope alone is the desire for something other than what is, and can further solidify that you are living a life that you don't want. So I don't know how many people are into like kind of manifesting the life that they want. I'm not. I can't claim to be someone that knows a formula or practice to be able to quote unquote manifest things, but I have been working over these past few years on myself, understanding myself, knowing what I want for myself and my life, and what would be a satisfying life for me to live, and then pursuing those things. And I feel like I'm pursuing these things with a level of optimism, and I'm trying to be as prepared for these opportunities that come, and it seems like they're all coming at the right time. And so that's the closest thing to manifestation that I feel like I could speak to. But I feel like just hoping and sitting back and wanting something better, but focusing and having hope can just further confirm that you don't have what you want, and it could kind of keep your headspace in that and keep you there. And I feel like that would be detrimental to working with it, instead of optimism of trying to create something, being proactive about it. Were you about to say something, Brian?
Nope, you nailed it.
Okay. Let's see. You are the thing you must put hope in. Do this while you're optimistic about the world around you, and the results are life-changing. How do I get out of this hole? Understanding your state of despair, a prolonged state of purposelessness. I feel like a lot of veterans coming out of the military, it's kind of like murky, like muddy waters of just, especially if you're a combat veteran, you could fairly simply like fall into like a law enforcement occupation. But for some people that wanted to fight for their country and be patriotic and do that whole thing, but not necessarily want to be holding a gun for their career every day and having that type of that risk day in and day out, they want to pursue something else. It's kind of harder to kind of remap your brain, to find purpose elsewhere. And there are opportunities, and there's a bunch of organizations that are willing to give help to veterans to find different careers. But with all everyone reaching out, and you just kind of having to sit after being given so much direction with your career in the military, it's kind of hard to figure out what it is that you want, because especially after so long being told what to do for so many years. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to comment on the topic of purposelessness and hope. This is why I love Alan Watts. His big thing is like, you just have to pick it. You have to pick what you want. That's kind of what life's about. You just need to make that decision and decide what you want to be, what you want to do. And then after that, you just have to learn to live with it. And I think that's kind of the hard thing that a lot of vets deal with is, number one, you don't know how to pick what you want because you've been told what you want for so long. And then number three, you don't know how to live with it because you're living in such a new environment. You don't even know how to live here. You don't even know how to live well without direction very well. So I think for me, that the lessons that Alan Watts puts forward were very helpful in that it just kind of simplified it and let me realize that like, this is just something I have to decide what's going to bring me joy in my life. And in that, I began a process of self-exploration to get to know myself so I could figure out what I like to do. What does Brian enjoy? What are my habits? What are my hobbies? What are my habits so I can change them? What are my hobbies so I can get more involved in them? And for me, that's just been a life-changing experience. It's like, you wake up one day and it's like, you know exactly what you want to do, and you go forward and you do it. And it turns out you have the skill set to do it. You have the time to do it and the ability, and it's personally beneficial for you. And so that for me was the biggest struggle, is just the ability to even understand that I had to pick something. I had to decide what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be, because I wasn't at war anymore. I wasn't a Marine. I wasn't doing any of the stuff I'd been doing. I had to define a new personality for myself. And once I began to get to know myself a little bit better, that's when I began to foster some of that optimism inside of me that kind of helps me get through every day in a positive way.
Yeah. How did I get here in the first place? When did this start? Unbalanced focus on all the wrong things. Passive living without direction allows the currents to take you to murky waters. Navigating to a life of purpose and satisfaction is only done on purpose. The path to this purpose-driven life isn't found on another person's map in the same destination. So it's you know what? I'm actually just going to roll right into the next part, which
I was just going to jump in here. The whole idea behind purpose, though, is it has to be yours. You know what I mean? It has to be uniquely and inherently yours. And that like I just said, that comes through a process of self-exploration. I just wanted to throw that in there real quick. We're talking about all this purposelessness, so just without getting too negative.
Yeah, no, it does need to be. It needs to come from within you. You need to spend some time with yourself to be able to figure out what it is that you want for yourself, because just living in like a city and being in just close proximity with other people. They might even be similar to you, friends, family, and whatnot. It's very easy to follow somebody else's path to happiness. You might see someone that has all these boxes checked on things that you want for yourself, but you got to understand that they might have some boxes left unchecked that you have. And so it's not necessarily emulating somebody else verbatim. It's finding the purpose that you want, that you would find your satisfaction in living. So don't always go off of just somebody else's map to happiness, because you won't end up in the same place. This leads me to a Theodore Roosevelt quote: "Comparison is the thief of joy." So that's another one. If you have something, you have a job, you have a career, you have a home, you have a family, but you see somebody else and they have more, or they have a nicer car, a nicer house, their career is salary based and it's making a whole bunch of zeros, then that could be easy to become jealous, and instead of just having satisfaction and being content with what you have, and that knowing that what you have is enough, you could have that robbed from you. And it's very simple. It's a very something very slippery slope to fall for. So when we compare ourselves to what others have, or simply how they are, we are essentially making ourselves feel downright inadequate and deflated with a low self-esteem to match. Also, we're only seeing the image they are presenting to the world. We don't know how much they are suffering in their mind. So this goes to the next question: how am I doing right now? Do I need to feel this way? Are you thoughtlessly living an unfulfilling patterns? So that's this one's a common one. What do you think, Brian? I think it's very easy to I feel like we're, especially in this Western modern world, it's comfort. There's a big emphasis on comfort and TV shows and tasty bad food for you, and it's like it's easy to get into habits and patterns that don't promote proactive living into pursuing stuff that you want to carve out for your own life.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this baked in rigidity, like you have to become this person. And once you become that person, you can't change. People can't change. That's not how this works. You just have to be you.
Yeah,
you know? I mean, a politician
dog,
changes his mind. He's a flip flopper. It's not that the merits of the argument have changed or new evidence has come to life. He's a flip flopper. You know, it's like, for some reason, we just come from such a rigid culture. It's like the idea that you could look at something, do it for 10 years, and then decide on the 10th year, this doesn't serve me well anymore, and I'm not going to do it ever again. And for some reason, that just doesn't occur. We're just so passive with our thoughts. And I know this was a big issue with me when I would start slipping into my anxiety, begin to have fears or concerns about the futures. I wasn't disciplined enough to understand that I had control over that emotion. And I could literally get myself just by doing anything, distract myself, go do anything, go feel a different emotion. But instead, I would isolate and I would dwell on those thoughts, and they would consume me, and it would become my day, my week, you know, never quite a month, but, you know, normally you'd have like pretty long periods of time where you'd be like soaking in that feeling. And I just lacked the understanding that I had the ability to create new emotions inside of myself. If I wanted to be happy, then go do something that makes me happy, because sitting in my room thinking about the things that scare me about the future is clearly not bringing me joy. Just like sitting in my room thinking about the painful things in the past aren't going to bring me joy either. So
yeah, where do we learn these behaviors, and why do we rely on them? I feel like because they're easy, and they hit some pleasure centers of just like having time to ourselves, quietude, being able to relax. But with that comes stagnation, and if there's too much stagnation, there's the lack of progress. And we learn these. Where do we learn these?
I would argue we learn it from our parents. I would argue that in the home is where we learn these lessons in the beginning. I mean, how many of us have grandparents that we grew up with that, you know, refused to adopt new forms of technology and would put on shows of being resistant to change? I mean, that was behavior that was modeled for us. And in our formative minds, we began to look at that and say, that's what it's supposed to be when you're a happy, healthy human. And I don't think that's true. I think you inherently have to be very flexible. I mean, you talk about, you know, wanting to do these things, you know, manifesting intentionality, whatever you want to call it, and they just kind of keep happening. Well, if you're not in the right mind frame, if you're not in a place where you can be flexible when those things come your way, you might not even see those as opportunities. They might just be like things that look like problems, or, you know, obstacles that you have to overcome, not great opportunities for you to like propel yourself forward with. So it's just, I think there's something about our culture that raises people to feel like they have to be inflexible, they have to be defensive about their beliefs, they have to fight with people over things that are just absolutely illogical and there's no good reason for. And I can't really explain it necessarily, but there just seems like there's this contentiousness. I know at least in my family there was. I'm assuming in other people it's similar as well. But yeah, there's just this weird rigidity that we all cling to, that somehow we know what the absolute truth is. We figured it out when we were about 16 years old, and we've just been making micro adjustments to make our lives better ever since. And it's like, that's not an accurate description of what's going on here.
Yeah, it feels like these behaviors, these habits that are like being put into like the modern world, just regular society, it's counter to like that innate ability for humans to be able to adapt. And it's like, specialize in something, just focus on that. If you're unsatisfied in that life, then it's too bad. You're going to be a roofer forever or something like that. And it's like not having the it like takes away, what is it, like your confidence to be able to carve out something that you want for yourself, when it's, you just need to start. And breaking away from like old habits could be just satisfying in itself, and just creating something new, something you weren't expecting in your life could just in itself be exciting. And I don't know, it's so easy to lose that a sense of like adventure in your life, and pursuing just stuff that you're interested in. It's kind of a shame that it's so common to fall into that pattern.
Well, and I think you raise an issue there because you're talking about something that you're interested in. And I know for myself, I didn't really begin to explore my interests until much later in life. Prior to that, I just absorbed all the interests of my family and the people around me. I would watch football because that's what we all did. I would, you know, drink because that's what we all did. You know, it's like you play poker because that's what we all did. It's like you just do these things because you believe that this is what a normal human should be interested in, what they should be doing, but there's been no process of self-exploration. So you're just becoming like a Xerox copy that's been copied again, and it's just a little bit harder to read or understand, you know. So it's a lack of authenticity, a lack of genuineness, and that lack of authenticity, it's a betrayal, and that betrayal, the body keeps the score, you know. I mean, it's eventually going to evidence itself in your life. You're going to start showing these symptoms that you're not being genuine to yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, we've been harping on these questions, but do I know who I am and what I want? So these are square one to figure out yourself. And is what I want incoming, or am I isolated from receiving it? So sometimes you need to burrow yourself into a situation that you're not really primed to make any big adjustments to, like a career or something, and you need to start making changes in a larger sense or a general sense around your life to be able to make adjustments and put yourself in a situation that you could start making more proactive changes. Where do I want to be in the future? Oh, sorry.
We talked about this like a couple of weeks ago, but it was the idea that one of the reasons why a lot of people don't experience much changes in their life is because they're actually not doing any preparation for change. Change very rarely just happens spontaneously. You very rarely just wake up a completely different person. Normally there's some kind of an experience or an incident that, you know, comes before the change. And so in my life, what I began to realize is that the way that I would prepare for change was I started putting down things that didn't serve me well. You know, some specific examples: I stopped listening to talk radio. I stopped consuming things that were negative. I started to listen to information that I didn't know about, things that were like mind-blowing facts, you know, things that just really caught my attention with amazement. And I just started consuming things that were more positive, things that were more engaging, and isolating less. A big part of it was building community. And after doing this for, I kid you not, like 4 months, I looked back at my life and I just couldn't even tell the person I was compared to the person I used to be. I was so happy. I had almost no symptoms of my PTSD. I could manage my anxieties. I wasn't reactive anymore. I wasn't as reactive anymore. It was unbelievable. But I look back and I could specifically say to myself, I cut out some behaviors in my life that were not serving me well. And that's a recommendation that I can hand to anybody that's looking for change. You need to critically look at what you're doing on a daily basis and ask yourself, is this making me happier, or is this just keeping me where I'm at? Because that really is the equation. You can just stay where you're at and not be happy, or you can be happy, but that happiness is going to require some change. You're going to have to adjust and augment your life. And I would argue, for me, it was what I was consuming on a daily basis. So by cutting those things out, I found myself absolutely primed for change. When the opportunities came, I was ready, I was waiting, and I was prepared.
Sure. Yeah. And sometimes change is going to require sacrifice, especially depending on how embedded you are in the previous life that wasn't satisfying, that you're trying to break from. For myself, since getting out of the military almost, I've been just getting deeper entrenched in like the construction industry and like getting certifications, and then I got into inspection and started just consolidating all these different inspection certifications, and I'm making some decent money from what I'm doing. None of it is satisfying. I hate it. I have to wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes to go and watch concrete get poured. Doesn't serve it. It serves the need for finances, but it doesn't do anything for my soul. And that's where I need to make some change. So it's like right now I'm at another point of just adapting to that. So I'm right now in a point in my life where I'm trying to make a career change, and I filled out some applications to pursue a job in like peer support for other fellow veterans, and that comes with a pay cut. And it's like that's where my sacrifice is going to have to come in. And so it's not like it's just the point of, well, I want to make a change. I'm ready for change. I'm going to read on this and just gain a little bit of knowledge and be prepared for a different job. It's all encompassing. It's a whole, it has to do with all aspects of your life. And so it's not for the faint of heart, taking control of your life, but it's also, it's probably the most satisfying thing you could do. It's the point that we're here, is to have command over your own life. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And if you find other people that are on that same path and they're carving out their own way, and that those things just happen to coincide and work well and have some synergy with what your life path is going through, then it just blossoms into a very it turns into an environment that's just optimized for growth, when that has been the intention the whole time. So yeah, so pursue what you love, and if you don't know what you love, spend time with yourself and figure out who you are.
Yeah, that is
for yourself.
A very hard question. What do you love? I mean, if you really want to get down to it, that's kind of like one of the biggest questions you could probably ask yourself. And what do you truly love? And I think if you can give yourself an honest answer about that, and not have it be like some external force or some material thing, and have it be something that you're truly passionate about, I think it's going to be like a life-changing event. I think that really, for me, was one of the bigger and harder questions I had to ask myself. What do I love? And when I finally was able to ask myself that, I love doing this. I love talking to people. I love working with people. And kind of the path that opened up for me is, once I knew what I loved, I kind of got this vision for my life, where last July, I went back in August, but I signed up for school in July. I finished my bachelor's over the next 2 semesters and took a whole bunch of classes in psychology. And now I'm in a master's program working on my degree in clinical psychology, so I can become an LMFT and try to work with vets to help them process trauma like I've done, and it's like, all of this has just been me waking up every day, trying to be present, trying to improvise, trying not to copy other people, but you got to keep your head on a swivel. You got to pay attention. You can't be worried about the future. Can't be upset about the past. You just got to be present here and now, looking for the opportunities as they come, because this world is full of opportunities. I mean, it is just an endless wagon train of opportunities. The problem is, if you're not healthy enough to see them as opportunities, it's just a constant barrage of obstacles, you know? And it's like, in that, I go back to my original point, you know, your optimism is defined by your relationship with the world. If you see all those, you know, opportunities as obstacles, man, it's going to be a pretty miserable life, because the world's full of opportunities. So that means you see nothing but a world full of obstacles.
And it's almost staggering how much momentum comes with realizing these opportunities and being prepared for them. And then it's almost like being part on a slingshot, and you're just being propelled in the direction that you're trying to carve out for yourself. Like you're talking, Brian, about going and pursuing a master's degree in psychology. I'm interested in psychology as well. I just find the mind extremely fascinating. The concept of trauma and how it could cause obstacles for growth, and how just even like a single word could change how just some genes are expressed in someone's life. But I mean, you carve your these things in your life, Brian. You're going to school for a master's degree. How much are you paying for that out of your pocket?
Oh, and this is the beauty of being a vet. Young Brian did me a whole bunch of favors. I had no idea, but when I joined the military, when I was 18 and spent my 5 years doing all that, I was making a massive investment in my future. And so now I've got the VA who's financing my education. And so it's like, instead of walking away from all of this with like a crazy amount of debt, the universe has provided. You know, it's like, if I got a desire in my heart, I became very genuine and very like honest about wanting to pursue that desire. And as I've moved forward, it's like the pathway has just been completely open for me. You talked about manifesting. I'd call it like a intentionality, or like being in the flow is something I like. I like the flow concept because I've heard it explained in like a step-by-step process. And I actually mentioned it earlier, but you know, one of the things that I found is that if I've got an objective I want to do, and I can understand that the objective is personally beneficial for me, number one, if I can understand that I've got time to complete the objective, number two, and then number three, that the objective, whatever it is within my skill set. I've heard people argue that that's kind of how you get into the flow state. If you can get those three things to line up, then it's like a kind of a minimal effort equation to getting stuff done, you know. And I can say it's true as I'm going back to school. Man, the master's is so much easier work than my undergraduate was. And it's not that it's easier, it's just I'm in a mentally healthier place. You know, I'm really receiving information. I'm able to digest things. I'm present. What a crazy concept that being present could just have such a impactful, you know, such an impact on your overall life. But that's the big trick, you know. It's just, if you could just be present, if you could just pay attention right here and now and figure out what you want to do, then you might find that you've got a life that you really want to live.
Yeah, and it's interesting how much your mindset really just flips from when you're in just relying on just hope alone for changing your life, to being proactive and creating this life that you want. I look back on in my life and just all the things that I've broken away from that don't serve me. There's purpose for those things in my life still. I'm pursuing a career in peer support for veterans as well, and it's like all those things that I was going through have is context, is just learning experiences for myself to be able to have empathy for other people. So it's not even like breaking away from those things, is me putting them behind me and never seeing them again. These are all part of your life. And so I feel like a lot of people will be nervous, anxious, and not really want to break into a new career or a new just a new goal in general, whatever it may be, because they've been embedded for so many years, decades even, in this different thing. They don't want to feel like all that time has been wasted. But it's the thing is that you're not, when you break away and you start a new path, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience. And it's like, that's what life is about. And it's like when you make a community of other people that are doing a similar thing, and it's like, it's everything could be created. You can make everything that you want. And it's we need more people on that same page, so that we're having less people living passively and just resorting to stuff like crime, or just trying to self-medicate with alcohol and drugs, to the point of just making them feel numb and trying to escape their own life, when this is just, it just needs to be, the environment needs to be cultivated so that it's a prime environment for growth. But it takes the effort, it takes the time, and it's not easy. And like I said earlier, it does cost sacrifices in different parts of your life, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And yeah, that's
I think
what I wanted
one
to
of the
say on
other
that.
things that's really important when we're talking about this change, and this was another big one for me, there's two things. You need, number one, you got to have the desire to change. You actually have to have a real desire to change, but even more than a real desire to change, because that could just be that hope and something with no foundation. You need to have a belief that you can change as well. You need to couple those two things: a desire to change and then a genuine belief that you can change. And then when you begin to critically start evaluating some of the things you're carrying with you and putting them down, that's when you're really primed to really make some positive changes in your life. But it's about getting to a mental state where you just understand that what you're doing right now is not serving you well. You're not trying to criticize yourself. You're not being hard on yourself. You're being patient. It's just, we got some new stuff we got to learn, and that can be hard for the ego to accept, because the ego wants to be there to make a snap judgment on everything and feel like it's right. And so it's just kind of putting the ego in the background so you can take a little bit more time to examine what's really going on without feeling so personally connected.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back and connect. It's been a couple of years, but I'm trying to think back to like the times that I would just come home from my construction job and just drink until I drank myself to sleep. And I'm trying to get back into that headspace of being unsatisfied and wanting change, but like what got me to that point that I'm actually willing to be proactive and make moves and change things myself with my own hands. And I think it started coming to have the thing about self-medicating is that it's also detrimental to like your process of thinking and processing things, of what's going on with you right then and there. So it's very much while you're awake, putting you to sleep, and you're not able to really process. Because I feel like the point was, it's probably right around the time that I had the insight of when I started experimenting with like psilocybin, that my life is just not something that I'm happy with. So I need a drink to be able to at least be satisfied enough to get through it, just to keep trudging through. But it's like, it was very much a byproduct of that unsatisfying life, but that byproduct was just making things even worse. And it's like, oh, I what I was using as a band-aid I needed to get rid of it before you even can start making positive changes. And that's like a hard realization to have when you're depending on it. When you're depending on it to go to sleep, or just to be, even to convince yourself that you're somewhat satisfied with your life. And that's a difficult position to be in. So it's like, if you run into somebody that's in that space, definitely would ask that you have some empathy, because it's a very confusing and it's a dark place to be.
I can actually speak to a little bit of what's going on there. I mean, obviously, when you're drinking, you're essentially like triggering your brain to reward you by giving you dopamine. But there's a lot of other stuff that's happening too. When you're drinking, your brain actually enters a state of myopia, where you begin to get like more focused on things. That's one of the things that happens. Another thing so it's easier to concentrate. You're kind of more present, you know what I mean? Then and there, you're not worried about the past. You're not worried about the present. You're just focused right now. And then on top of that, your amygdala, which is your flight or fight response, or freeze, it begins to like kind of mellow out a little bit. So this is why people might engage in a little bit more risky behavior when they're drinking, because their amygdala is not properly functioning. And then in addition to that, the portion of your brain that stores short-term memories kind of begins to shut down a little bit. That's why it's so hard to remember stuff after you've been drinking. So with those four things going on, that's why we keep going back to it. You know what I mean? It, number one, gives us that hit of dopamine. Number two, helps us focus like we're not normally focused. It's not really focus, it's the state of myopia, and we're not really going to remember much of it, but it feels like it, you know what I mean? It's like a counterfeit. And then you're messing with your amygdala, so you're not as afraid or you're not as aware of what's going on. And like I said, it's like this weird state that we put ourselves in, like we're zombies, you know? I feel good, but I'm not going to remember much of it.
Yeah, it's like using a Band-Aid for a hemorrhage, and it's like it's actually, well, even worse, because it's actually worse for you. So it's like having just deciding to get drunk from the moment you get home till the time you go to sleep. It's like, not only are you compromising that time for figuring out what you want and pursuing a life that you want, you're also like putting your body in this state that is just, you're going to be waking up with a hangover. And it's like the biggest, you have the body, mind, spirit. I kind of see them as like, that's like the holy trinity of like what you have in this life, and just what so much could come from. And it's like you're in your dissatisfaction, excuse me, you're compromising your connection with your body, mind, spirit. And yeah, it's a slippery slope, and it's just filled with potholes. And it could be a tough one to navigate, but be optimistic. Pursue understanding yourself, seek self-improvement, what you want for yourself. This life is meant for us to be able to create something out of something that we want. And so don't waste that time just sitting back and worrying about the problems that are, because everything is just everything's temporary, and you just need to prime yourself and get yourself in a good environment for growth.
Just kind of going back to what you were talking about, alcohol, I think there are a lot of guys out there and females that are maybe experiencing some substance abuse in their life. And I think it's important to illustrate what's going on there, because a lot of times you just feel like the villain, or you're the bad guy, or you don't have discipline, and you're weak, or you're whatever. And so you get down on yourself. But that's not what's happening. Essentially, what's going on here is, when you were a kid, when you were going through your formative years and your brain was forming and you were forming all those first neural pathways, you went through some series of experiences that made it so your body wasn't properly producing dopamine. You weren't getting that reward feeling. And as you got older and you began to explore and find new things that would give you that reward feeling, some of us find driving cars fast. Some of us find, racing motorcycles as the thing that gives us dopamine. Some of us find alcohol. Some of us find hard drugs, and that's what produces the dopamine. So understand, when you're going back to drink, your body, or it's not your body, but your body is producing dopamine in a way that it normally hasn't, but it should be. And this is where we go to that concept of change. It's literally about changing the way that your body responds to things. By eliminating, the drugs or the alcohol, you're going to need to find a way to begin to produce dopamine naturally, doing like things that make you happy and are personally beneficial for yourself. So there's a bit of rewiring here that's got to go on. But I just want to emphasize, this isn't about you being a bad person. It's not about you being an addict or anything like that. This is about you trying to compensate with some trauma that's probably very unresolved in your past. And it's just about learning how to rewire your brain and how to get that reward feeling from doing other things that, like I said, are personally beneficial for you, and not, risky behavior with long-term consequences. So that's just my little take on alcohol there, or just substance abuse in general.
I think that is actually all that we have as far as what we have prepared to talk about. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Nancy, what's up?
Oh, you guys, I mean, this has just been incredible. Sorry. That's my phone. Sorry. So much of what you say I can identify with. I've never been in the military, but it describes retirement. You know, I had my life
Oh,
all laid out with my job and my career and everything. And, you know, early on, a lot of what you're talking about is expectation and comparison. You know, the expectation of what you're supposed to do. And if you're not doing it, if you do something bad, I'm not supposed to do that. And then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, you compare yourself to everybody else. I'm not good enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm not smart enough. Oh, crap, I didn't get the right answer. And it beats on us. Um, and like I said, so much of what you're saying is my retirement. I'm trying to adjust. Now, what do I do? What do I do with my
mm,
time?
Mm-hmm.
And then with you talking about construction, what struck me is that you're physical, 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 physical. And now that you're looking at, you know, the peer support, you're going into your heart and you're breaking through that physical. You're exercising your mind where even as an inspector, you have to think, but it's still very structured. And now with, you know, moving into peer support in your heart and support, that's everything. That's everything. Um,
yeah.
so I mean, it's just really great. And I had one more thing. Oh, what you were saying about your master's program, how it's easier than your undergrad.
Yeah.
Undergrad, you have to take all kinds of crap that you have no interest in. And now that you're in your master's program, it's everything you're interested. So the path is actually pulling you. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's out of your control. It's like, oh my God, you know, it's happening for you exactly the way it should. And it's pure joy
Yeah.
because it's, yeah, and it, like I said, it's pulling you. You know, you don't have to do anything because you're on autopilot doing what
Yeah.
it is you're supposed to be doing.
And I would
And
define that autopilot as presence. You know what I mean? That I'm
uh-huh,
just here now. You know, I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm not worried about yesterday. I'm here now and I'm loving it, you know?
right. You don't have to fight it. You don't have to do anything because it's all there in front of you for you to pick it up and run
Yeah.
with it. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Alan Watts has got this thing where he talks about being like in the current, you know, and the current will take you wherever you need to
Yeah.
go. I know we were speaking about the current negatively here, but he talks about the current taking you wherever you need to go. He just cautions you, don't try to grab onto anything. You know, you're just going
Right.
on for the ride, going on the ride. So
Yeah.
that's what I've been trying to do is
Float
just
in the
go for the
river.
ride. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. Because as soon as you grab onto something, it's an expectation and it can, you know, and it may not end the way you want it to.
Well, and it goes back to that whole concept that the root of all pain is attachment. And when you grab onto something, you become
Mhm.
attached to it and it will inevitably cause suffering. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And how much is acceptable suffering?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. We
Stuff.
had a conversation a while ago about the word suffering, and in the West, as Americans, we try to avoid suffering. You know what I mean? We want nothing to do with it. We make our whole lives about avoiding suffering. And if I suffer, I must be a bad person who deserves it. But we were looking at the word, and when you go back to the etymological definition of it, the Latin words, excuse me, the Greek word suffere, they define it as the consequence of bearing a burden is what causes suffering. And in that, you begin to
Yeah.
understand that like any burden causes suffering. If when I gave my wife her wedding ring, it would cause her suffering at some point in time. You know, it's just any burden, no matter how beautiful. Yeah, it's going to become a burden someday. Yeah, it's just
Hmm.
funny. And so then I begin to get a much more natural, like healthier view of suffering, that it's just this thing that happens whenever we bear anything. All the materialism engaged in before I got
Yeah.
healthier, I look at my full closets now and I'm like, this is causing me suffering. I need to get rid of this stuff, you know? So it's just a very interesting take on how to view suffering. And, you know, I just think it's a lot healthier. I was going to say also, you had mentioned about not being a veteran. This is something Alex and I are real big on. Trauma is trauma is trauma. It doesn't matter where you got it. We're just all humans. We'll respond to trauma the same way. It can just be different circumstances. So yeah, we're not exclusive at
Exactly.
all. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's why it's just so powerful and potent because it applies to so many things. I didn't see the gore and the horror that you did, but I saw the gore and the horror of my career. You know, it wasn't physical, but you know, it had its, you know, it had its moments.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And the psychological
yeah.
consequences, it doesn't matter how bad it was. I mean, how, you can't even define that. It's so subjective for everybody. I mean, two guys could walk
Yeah.
into a room. They actually proposed this question: what is it that makes two guys walk into a room? They see the exact same thing, and one guy walks out with PTSD, and the other guy walks out and everything's fine. You know, it's
Yeah.
like it's psychological. I mean, there's something in there that very likely had to do with some trauma that you experienced as a child that, you know, basically you didn't the way I define it is when you're a little kid, most of our trauma gets really minimized or ignored. And then when you get older and you really begin to experience real trauma, you never learned how to process that as a kid. You just learned how to ignore it and minimize it. And so now when you get back from Iraq, it's like, well, I guess I should just ignore this and minimize it. You know, it's like, well, that guy over there doesn't have his legs, so I didn't have it that bad. It's, you know, it's like, that's not going
Yeah.
to serve you for very long.
Yep. I mean, it's horrible for him, but it has nothing to do with you.
Exactly. And I mean, and what the crazy part is when you watch that guy who's got no legs and he seems to be living a much happier life than you do. It's just that was one of the changing experiences that I had in 2014. I went to talk to a psychologist, and the man had served in Vietnam from 1967 to 1968. And I'm just sitting there with my jaw dropped as he's telling me these stories. And it's like, Brian, if this man can live a life productively and full of joy, having experienced all those things, what's going on with you, man? And then I had to start becoming real honest with myself. It all started before I ever got in the military. It started before I ever went to the recruiter's office. This all went back to like unresolved childhood trauma. And this was me acting out like what I believed an adult should do. But really, in many ways, I was just a traumatized little kid. And you
We
can
go
imagine
back
the
to
results
that.
were not good.
You know, sometimes I wonder if we ever get past the age of 12. You know, I look at people and it's like going, that's high school crap. Why are you still doing it?
Yeah.
But expectation and comparison.
Mm-hmm. Freud, I'm not a huge fan, but he talks about the idea of getting stuck at certain phases if your needs aren't met. And I really think that's a lot of what happens, is that we kind of get stuck at a certain phase when we didn't get the opportunity to properly process the trauma. You're just kind of like, you're locked up there. You know, you need some growing.
It ends your emotional growth when something like that happens. But yeah, it's all very, man, it was powerful. It was a really great conversation. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's all that we have for this show. So our next one is October 16th. That one's also at 11 a.m. We're going to have a special guest, Dr. Chris Stoffer, who is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Oregon Health and Science University. Dr. Stoffer is involved in research on psilocybin, MDMA, and oxytocin, and is currently conducting several clinical trials. He'll be speaking about his work and what is going on locally at OHSU, as well as addressing topics such as group-based psychedelic therapy and the role of the therapeutic alliance. So if you're interested in that, make sure, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, be sure to join our meetup. I'll make sure to leave a link to that, and then you could see all the different events that we schedule for PPS, and then you could, from there, look at the descriptions for individual shows to see if you're interested, and then you'll have the link for these Zooms so you could be there live, and then you could ask whatever questions you might have for him. So with that, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys on the next one.